It's one of the most iconic moments in the history of golf. The locale, the 18th hole on the stadium course at the Players' Championship. The opponent had won 10 of his previous 16 starts. The golf world was looking for someone who could tame a tiger.
Be the right club.
And with a 6-iron from 179, the moment was born.
Be the right club.
Welcome to the Be the Right Club Today podcast, presented by Makefield Putters.
Be the right club today.
Now, here are your hosts, Hal Sutton and Mark Greenhouse.
Welcome into the Be the Right Club Today podcast, presented by Makefield Putters, Hal Sutton and Mark Greenhouse. Joined tonight by Nick Raffaele. And it's going to be a pleasure to talk to you for tonight. But Hal, welcome back.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Good to have Nick on. Nick has an illustrious background of the Hogan Company and then Callaway, doing all their tour relations with all the tour players. So he's dealt with all these guys that everybody's heard of.
Yeah, that is true. Well, Nick, welcome into the show. And
thanks for having me.
We're glad you're here.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and Hal, Nick and I were talking before you jumped on that I had a friend who worked for Callaway, and he knows exactly who he was, says he was a heck of a salesperson and very inquisitive. So we have connections as well.
There we go.
The golf industry is a very small industry.
At some point, we've all probably
small.
And at some point, we all probably have 7 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon, too, because that's always the joke that's around Hollywood, that everybody somehow knows Kevin Bacon or knows somebody that knows Kevin Bacon. So we'll take it from there. Nick, you've spent a lot of time at the Ben Hogan Company, a lot of time at Callaway. You've dealt with players like Mickelson and Furyk and Els and Annika Sorenstam. We're going to get into some of that. But I want to talk about the living legend that you got to be part of the company while he was still around, in Ben Hogan. What kind of an experience was that?
Well, for me, it was a dream come true. Growing up west of Fort Worth, my mom and dad weren't members of a country club. I was a member of a country club, but I kind of fell into golf late, played a lot of team sports. And then once I got into golf, anything in Fort Worth or west of Fort Worth, you talk to anybody to get any advice, it was always Mr. Hogan said. Whether it was Roland Harper at Colonial or Lynn Vaughn at Squaw Creek, and who I grew up with, Roland Harper's son, Larry Harper, was an assistant there. So, everything was referenced Hogan, and everybody carried a Hogan staff bag. So growing up, my lifelong dream was to get to work for the Hogan Company, and it wasn't easy. I tell the story to my kids. It was like over 6 years. It was like 3 resume submissions and 2 interviews before I finally got a chance, and I said yes. So it was great because, and I said this whenever Callaway bought Hogan, and then I took over their tour department. They'd asked me to speak to their marketing department, their HR. I told them they should feel very privileged because when we worked at the Hogan Company, we worked for Mr. Hogan. And at Callaway, everybody had a very strong reverence for Mr. Callaway. They always referred to him as Ely, Ely this. So I said, we get to carry on the name of an individual who's no longer on the earth. And what greater responsibility can you have than to represent somebody, their values, when they're no longer here to watch that or steward that? And I would always say, I don't know who Mr. Mizuno is. I don't know who Mr. Spalding is. I don't even know who, Mr. Titleist is. But I know who Mr. Hogan is, and I know who Ely Callaway was. So it was a dream come true for me.
I don't know about you, Hal, but growing up, it was, Wilson's staff or really Ben Hogan or McGregor were kind of the 3 big brands that people played.
It was, and I was with the Hogan Company, so, I played their irons, and because Shreveport's not that far away from Fort Worth, and we had Shreveport Country Club, there were about 5 or 6 members that were actually members at Shady Oaks where Ben Hogan was at. They played some with him. He would play with people like that. I never had the pleasure of playing with him. My dad was a member at Shady Oaks, and I was scheduled one time to play with him, and he decided he didn't want to play with me. So I never got the pleasure.
Nick, how about you?
I never got to see him hit a golf ball. And I'll never forget, I got my start with Hogan covering Colorado, New Mexico, and El Paso. I was an outside sales rep, had the Colorado PGA and the Sun Country section of the PGA. I worked there a couple of years, did really, really good in that section, and management asked me to come back. I had a C territory as they classified them, and I said, hey, we want to put you in an A territory. I said, where? And they said, North Texas and Oklahoma. I thought, man, this is great. I'm going to get to go back right where it was. So when I went back, the Hogan brand wasn't as revered as well because it had moved out of Fort Worth. And Mr. Hogan had moved into the Western buildings outside of town, just outside of downtown. And I'd drive over there because I was told I should go by his office and see Pat Martin and Sharon Ray, his administrative assistants. So I'd pull up. I see his black Cadillac parked in his parking spot. You knew his parking spot because it said reserved Mr. Hogan. And when I saw his black Cadillac there, I'd drive on down the road. I didn't want to bother him. I'd drive on down the road, make another call or two, come back. And they go, oh, you just missed Mr. and Mrs. Hogan. And I said, yeah, I saw their Cadillac. I went on down the road. Well, one day, I'll never forget, I got a call from Sharon Ray, and she said, Mr. and Mrs. Hogan request your presence this Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. at their office. Mr. Hogan would like to meet you. And I said, okay. And I was nervous. I'd been around him a little bit at Shady Oaks. I'd seen him at Shady Oaks a time or two, but we all knew, leave him alone. He just wanted his space. And we always, model everything we did after looking, whatever he did. And so when I went in, I had the most pleasant conversation I've ever had. He was the most pleasant, genuine human being I've ever met. And I tell people that, and they're shocked. And I said, no. I said, I just went in, and Mrs. Hogan, her father ran a movie theater in Cleburne, Texas. And then Mr. Hogan obviously was born and raised in the Dublin and Stephenville, Texas area before the family tragedy with his father, and he moved to Fort Worth. I grew up in Mineral Wells, Texas. So I just thought, what am I going to talk to him about? I'm not going to talk to him about golf. So I just went in and said, hey, Mr. Hogan, I said, how you doing? And he said, I'm getting old. And he said, whatever you do, don't get old. And I said, well, every day the sun comes up in the east, it sets in the west. I said, unfortunately, Mr. Hogan, I'm a day older, and it starts all over again the next day. I said, I grew up in Mineral Wells, Texas. I think I grew up where y'all kind of grew up. I never had to say another word. They just talked about going to the Baker Hotel in Mineral Wells and dancing. And it was just, when I got up, I said, Mr. Hogan, I've taken enough of y'all's time. It was my pleasure. He got up. He walked around his big wooden desk. It's at Colonial Country Club still this day. And he stuck his hand out and he said, I want to tell you what a pleasure it is for me to meet you. And I said, oh, I think the pleasure's all mine, Mr. Hogan. And I said, if you need anything, Mr. Hogan, you let me know and I'll come by. You or Mrs. Hogan need anything, I'll come by. But that was the extent of it. But I got to learn about Mr. Hogan through Eldridge Miles, Roland Harper, Mike Wright, Jody Vasquez, and the best two is Gary Player and Lee Trevino. I asked as many questions as I could about Mr. Hogan to all those people. And Jackie Burke. I'll never forget spending some time with Hal at Boot Ranch. And I had Jackie for about an hour by myself one day. I couldn't ask him enough questions about Mr. Hogan and his game and what he thought. So I learned a lot about him through the peripheral people that really knew him.
Nick, Mr. Hogan was different in person than his demeanor or what everybody thought, basically. And, he was warm to me the few times that I was around him, other than when he was trying to make me a set of clubs and he saw I had a Byron Nelson driver. He didn't care for that. And, he made that pretty evident in what he said. And I don't think it was anything derogatory about Byron Nelson. I think it was just he was so proud of his own equipment that, he was how you need to be in a Hogan driver, basically. And honestly, and I think Nick would even attest to this, everything they did other than the driver was great. But the driver was We all had a hard time hitting
the McGregor
it, basically.
That was kind of the older McGregors, the 693, the MTs. Those were kind of, and then I think Wood Brothers came along, out of Houston. And then, Roger Cleveland did really, really well with Persimmons. There was a lot of good, Tony Pennis, but you're right. I never really, I always had some Hogan irons in my bag, but I never could kind of I remember I finally found one that was about a 6 screw that was a big burgundy one. But, you like you said, Hogan, his persona as a person versus his competitiveness. I got a great story. At Callaway, we had Palmer, Mr. Player. Mr. Callaway had lined up. He wanted to get Nicholas, Palmer, and Player together. He was kind of taking on the USGA about, loosening the rules. And he never got Nicholas, but I inherited Mr. Player and Mr. Palmer's relationship. So I had to go down to Bay Hill, and it was Kit, his wife, Charlie Meacham, Mr. Palmer, and then our CEO, and we're having dinner. Mr. Palmer's sitting there, and he's sipping a vodka, and our CEO didn't know at the time, and he quite didn't understand, how players kind of had rivalries. And he said, Arnie, he says, you won't believe this, Nick's from Fort Worth. He's a big guy with Ben Hogan Company. And I'll never forget, Mr. Palmer's glare just went straight to me. And he looked at me and he said, he never called me by name. and I was like, okay. He goes, he always referred to me as fella. And he talked about the Ryder Cup. He said, he was captain of the Ryder. All you do is refer to me as fella. And I said, oh, okay. And then he said, and we had played a practice round one time at the Masters. And he goes, I think he said Dow Finster Wall called him and said, hey, I got a match with Hogan and might have been Burke. But I got us a match. And it was a money game. And Mr. Palmer said, he goes, and I didn't really want to play. I told Dow I didn't really want to play. I'd been playing the weeks leading up to it. I'd won 2 out of 3 weeks. I was tired. And he goes, I went out and played. And he said, I hit it all over the place that day. And he said, and we're walking off 18 green. And he has got these eyes drilling down on me about Hogan. He said, we're walking off 18 green. And I hear Hogan with an earshot look at Jackie Burke and say, how did he get in this tournament? And all I could do is I say, well, Mr. Palmer, all I can tell you is I've been in the golf shop and Mr. Hogan referred to every one of us as hello, fellas. How y'all doing, fellas? He always referred, fellas was his name. And I said, and also, Mr. Palmer, I'm certain he had a way of gamesmanship too, that you might have just experienced that day. But I didn't know what to say. I didn't know. But I mean, it was just funny to see Mr. Palmer drill me down with those steely eyes. And you could tell he was after Mr. Hogan.
Well, I'm assuming that Mr. Hogan had his hands in all the clubs and how they were made and what they looked like.
That's about the time I met Hal's in 1998. I was responsible for moving the Ben Hogan Company back from Richmond, Virginia to Fort Worth. Spalding Sports had asked me to kind of help them be the eyes and ears and be the local boy, and we moved the company back. And so when we did, I asked Steve Dreyer, who had an independent assembly operation, I said, we need to hire people. I said, go through the employee list and find the right people. And he came with 6 names. And one of them was a lady named Huline Johnson. Miss Huline, I always referred to her. And all these people had worked at the plant previously before it left. And none of them said no. They came back immediately. We had 6. We started with 6 employees. So one day I was asking Miss Huline, I said, what was it like working in the plant? And for Mr. Hogan. And she said, it was great. It was great. It was a great company. He treated us great. She goes, but when he walked on the floor, you caught an eye of him coming on the floor. You made sure you looked at your stuff and made sure you had it all right. And I've been told many times that's the reason why his golf club company was successful, is because he was involved. He just didn't lend his name. He not only, because a lot of people don't know this, he tried to go sell the company in the 60s prior when and his original investors didn't want him to. They wanted him to go play, and they would, and just run the tournament. He said, no, this is my new job. And so that's another, physically he wasn't playing the way he wanted to, but he really looked at the Ben Hogan Company as his real job. And I think that's the reason why it was successful and so successful for so long. He had a vested interest, and he was there every day, looking at it.
That's the same way with my dad. So I did work for him for
Yeah.
3 months, 1 year when I was in just before high school, like eighth or ninth grade.
I hooked up my oldest
And I
son.
knew
My
I
oldest
never
son
wanted to
worked for
work
my
for him
dad.
again. So,
I said, go work for Grandpa. You think I'm tough?
yeah.
I don't know. My dad.
Yeah, but grandparents are always easier on the
I think
grandkids
my
than they
dad
were on
treated him as his own,
their
but
kids.
no,
Yeah, that's
it's
true.
fun times, and
He wasn't
He was
easy.
pretty hard.
when Hal came along in '98, I think was had a Strata golf ball and wanted to play irons. He didn't want to be compensated. Wanted to play what he thought was best for him, and he knew he played Hogan irons. And I was in the model shop at that time with Ronnie McGraw and Roger West, who did a lot of the tour stuff, and Roger did all the hand grinding. And I think they made a set. Matter of fact, it's a set of irons that Hal had that famous 6-iron with. I mean, they were made right there in the model shop with Roger West, and I know you played those irons for a good while.
Well, I started out with Hogan's in my rookie year. And
Yeah.
then I went to Titleist, and basically they took my irons and tried to copy them, and which was kind of a thing back in those days. You know, we didn't have to play what they were selling at the time. They, hand ground all the clubs, which Ronnie did for me. And, they were precision set of clubs all the time, and that's what you got from Hogan. I still got 4 or 5 sets that Ronnie ground for me,
It was very easy to wear.
They were soft. We
Yeah,
wore
it's
them
very
out
easy to
pretty
wear the
quick.
chrome out of the
I
face,
practiced
and,
a lot, so we wore them out. So that he was making a new set every year.
Going back to working for the Hogan Company, a lot of the things I even did later in my career, because I was 17 years out on the tour, and there was a couple of generational changes there. There was the Bernhard Langers and the Hal Suttons, and I'd go even Jim Furyk, and then I could throw in somebody like Craig Perry. May not be as well known, but those type of players. And Trevino was an idol too, and I inherited him at Spalding at Top Flight, which was another great time to spend time with him. But then then it got a little younger. I think Luke Donald and J.J. Henry and Jonathan Byrd were the first 3 guys I signed out of college. But what even though those generational things may have changed, what I learned at the Hogan Company and what I learned from Ronnie and Roger, and then from the guys across the alleyway at Impact Technologies, which was Tom Stites and Mike Taylor, John Hatfield, those guys worked at Hogan Company. They were just right across the workplace from us. What you learned from titles, it carried on through that 17 years. That was the only thing that was consistent. I'll give you an example. When you sign a tour player, the first thing I would ask is, which variable do you want to remain constant? Do you want to leave the ball alone and change the equipment? Or do you want to leave the equipment alone and change the ball? And what I never could figure out, that was something that I learned from Hogan, that with this is, I think, is his exact quote. With as many variables there are in the game of golf, the equipment maker's role is to remove the variables from the equipment so the player can play with confidence. And that sentence stuck with me in the model shop for a long time. And when players come, what I never could figure out, when corporations would sign these guys, they go, hey, we got to get them 14 clubs and a ball. We got to get them in our stuff. Well, I might not sign a guy until November. You might get somebody signed as early as September but it's usually back in the way. As good as they are, when you start changing multiple variables, you just don't know what's working and what's not working. And I just was adamant, and I'd like to. And the other thing too is, do you work from the green back to the tee, or do you work from the tee to the green with your equipment? And I was shocked as we got into the younger generations. You'd have to explain it. You'd have to go a little further. So we were kind of helping them not hurt themselves, because they were used to buying stuff off the rack and just putting it in play. Whereas, man, I remember if I had a 3-wood that was a persimmon, I wouldn't get rid of it. I mean, I was devastated if your bag got stolen. You worried about your 3-wood, your putter, and your wedge. Sometimes your driver. But that is those lessons learned at the Hogan Company stuck with me a lot. It got harder as times went on, and marketing became a big deal. And it really wasn't marketing; it was distance. That's the evil of the game. not literally, but distance. It's changed a lot of things.
So back when you were signing people to the Hogan Company or trying to get them, or when you were there, I don't even know if you were signing the people at the Hogan Company. They only required 8 to 10 clubs that you play.
Yeah.
They were interested in carrying the bag, and
Yep.
now Callaway was a whole different story.
And Ping
they
even
wanted,
softened that
because they
stance
made everything
eventually.
play it all.
They went to 12 clubs, but you're right. We had, our requirement was eight irons, combination irons and wedges, and the bag and the headwear. And we got there a little bit with Callaway. My big deal is you wanted what didn't make sense. Hal and Mark is when you give somebody, it doesn't matter if you're giving them $100,000 or you're giving them $1 million. That's an asset of yours, and the tools of their trade, of their craft, is the sticks that they have in their bag and the variables they know are that's going to happen when they need it to happen. Because everybody talks about a go-to shot. Well, everybody, I know this for just talking to too many players over the years, everybody doesn't have their A game every week, every day. You just don't have it. So, everybody talks about that go-to shot. Well, you need that go-to mentality of, hey, I just need to get through this day. I need to salvage par or 1 under. I got to scrap through this. It's Friday or Thursday. I just need to get to, I can find some better rhythm. And when you start doing all those multiples, they got to have something to regress to. And I just found it that by giving those players that freedom, and then I learned a lot by at Hogan, because we had blade players and we had some player cavity back players. I started noticing which woods they would gravitate to, because we weren't that requirement of woods. So it's funny to see guys that were in longer blades or game improvement per se, where they were gravitating to in fairway woods, like they were gravitating to Orlamar, flatter or Titleized flatter, bigger. Whereas like Hal had a tailor-made railer. I think that thing, when you look down, it looked like a peanut on the end of the shaft.
Yeah. I miss that club. I still have it, but it looks too much like a peanut now.
Compared to everything else, it probably looks like a marble.
Yeah. The good old days, when Nick was at Hogan Company, it was like giving Mario Andretti a precision car. You didn't give him a Chevrolet off the lot to drive.
When Callaway reapproached me about coming back as VP of operations, the first thing I said before I said if I'm interested, I said if I have to consider it, I'd have to have a forged iron, and I need a driver that has a hosel. And I thought that would make them go away. I really did think that would make the decision go away, because they had that big 360 forging that I think Michael Campbell won the U.S. Open with. But it was huge. It had the 360 undercut. But I said, you can't be successful if you don't have a forging, and I need a driver with a hosel. Because remember, they had the S2H2. Well, the difference between the S2H2 was, I think when Mr. Callaway invented that driver head was probably about 187 cc's. Maybe it wasn't 200.
Right.
Then Great Big Bertha, then the biggest Big Bertha. It was getting to 280, then to 300. Well, we were at 460, I think it is. And you got all that mass on that much of the tip of the shaft. And whereas you have a hosel, it's inserted. And I just felt like I always felt like you had to cut a Callaway driver to keep it in play. A good player. He couldn't fully release it. And Hal and all the guys that have been here and played much better golf than me, I just feel like a good player needs to be able to fully release his shot under pressure and know it's not going left.
Well, we're going to take a quick break. We'll get right back with Hal and Nick. I want to remind everybody about our sponsor, Makefield Putters, made in the USA. Their radial cusp technology helps you get the equator strike and the reduced skid effect. They've got the weight system. They've got all the different styles. The new blade putter. Hal's got the new blade putter. Todd Burrell, who co-hosts opposite you, Hal, he's got the blade putter. He's never taken that thing out of his bag. Go out to makefieldgolf.com. Make sure that you check it out. Also want to remind everybody about Peak Vision sunglasses. See like you've never seen before with Peak Vision sunglasses. The difference is immediate. Get ready for the season and use the code GS15 at peakvision.com. That's code GS15. And Hal, on our BeTheRightClubToday.com website, we now have a store for people to buy their favorite gear from with our logo on it. So there you go. We're moving up in the world.
Excited about that. Yeah. I hear everywhere I go, people talk about Be the Right Club Today. So if you want something that says that on it, it's there in the store.
You hit at least 18 putts around, more like low 30s. So you better make sure you got the right putter in your hand. And I don't think people have spent enough time trying to make sure they have that. Hi, I'm Hal Sutton. 25 years ago, I had the right club at the right moment, and it made a huge difference. Today, I've teamed up with Makefield Putters. I now use the right putter today. You see, Makefield has unique radial cusp technology. The ball releases faster off the face and keeps the ball rolling more on its axis. The result is a straighter putt, more on target. When you get everything just right, the putter that fits you just right, the one that you believe in, your confidence should be oozing out of you. So I would encourage all consumers, go to the Makefield website and educate yourself and get fitted correctly, get the right putter in your hand, and there's hope for better putting ahead.
You may have heard that polarized lenses are correct for the golf course. Stop! Polarized lenses can distort depth and diminish detail. Peak Vision's patented dual zone lens is non-polarized. You get 3 times more visual information for sharper reads, faster reactions, and total focus on fairways and greens. Don't buy polarized sunglasses. See like you've never seen before. Visit peakvision.com and use the code GS15. That's code GS15. All right. Well, Nick, I heard earlier that you said that Hal didn't want to get paid. How many other players ever had that kind of deal with you?
At Hogan, we didn't have that big of a problem with that. It was really unique. I mean, I'll never forget Craig Perry telling me, this is how I approach it, Nick. He says, I go out every year and there'll be either the best ball or there'll be the best 2 drivers that work for me. And then I just go to those companies and ask them what kind of deal do they have. And but I think at that time, Hal wanted the freedom, and there's a price of freedom, but there's also a reward of freedom. It lets you know that you're going the right direction. And so I think it took a couple of years before we formalized a 5-year deal, Hal. We had Justin Leonard at Hogan when the acquisition happened, and then I think we added Hal. Jim Furyk was next. A lot of people don't realize this.
Right.
Jim Furyk played a prototype type of Apex Pluses for about 2 years. They weren't even, I don't think, on the market. He played them for free. That was something Ronnie McGraw talked to Mike Furyk, Jim's dad, about, we'll never know how good that kid will be until we put a forging in his hand. And Jim made this leap. We signed Jim, and I think Bernhard Langer was my triumphant group with Hogan because we won. And that's kind of how I ended up on tour, Hal. After we moved the company back to Fort Worth, as an operations manager, Eddie Bender came to me and said, write a brand plan. I became national sales brand development manager, and I wrote a brand plan. And he came in, I'll never forget this, when I was up in Massachusetts. He walked in. It was about 25 pages long, this little report I wrote. And he said, hey, I got to ask you something. He said, everybody in this building tells me I got to be number 1 on tour. You tell me you only need 4 players. And they're Sutton, Furyk, Langer, and Leonard. And I said, yeah. And he said, the second thing is, he said, everybody starts with tour and a brand plan, and your tour strategy is in the very back. And so why is that? Why do you only need 4 and why is it in the back? I said, well, first off, we don't have any money. We were rebirthing the brand from zero. And we needed to lend on Spalding for some cash to get the endorsements. But I said, the big thing, and I'll never forget this, I said, Eddie, people write a movie script, which is your marketing plan, and then you go cast it. And I said, Ben Hogan movie script has already been written. We don't need somebody riding him. Hogan was self-made, self-taught. He was a fighter, a competitor, and iron play mattered. And an example I gave him was, I think, or he gave me was was Tiger Woods. Irons only mattered to Tiger on par fives because he was hitting a 4-iron or 5-iron on the par. All the other ones he's even down there with a wedge. And I said, when you look at Langer and Leonard and Sutton and Fury, the iron play is precision, and that's what Hogan is. So that's when he goes, hey, I got. He said, I need some help with the strata side of this. Would you help me? And I said, sure, whatever, because I was willing to do anything. And that's kind of how I got the tour job about '99. As I think we solidified. I think that's when Eddie solidified the endorsement deal with Hal and the famous strata cap and Ben Hogan iron on 18 taking on Tiger. I mean, that's how it all came down. And but we sought players because here's another thing that's kind of maybe interesting to the audience is at Callaway, and I don't mind saying this because I've been gone long enough. At Callaway, before we ever started January 1, we were going to spend $10 million in free products to tour players, salaries to tour reps, and travel expenses for tour reps and the tour vans. Now I got Japan, I got Europe, and I got the 4 tours in the domestic U.S., or really 3 at that time. So it was across the global. But we were spending $10 million before we ever left the building in a year. And I always felt like that those guys were away from the families, that we needed to add value. I've always thought how we add value is protecting our assets. Don't let our corporate teams make them switch too fast, because when you're paying them, we want them to play well, because I felt it was very important for them to go up 18 fairway with our cap in our bag, get a mic stuck in their face and say, hey, and the guy go, man, like Craig Perry said, he hit it. That was it. He hit that in with a 6-iron. It wasn't a 7-iron. I heard it recently. He hit that on Doral with a 6-iron, a Hogan iron, and but an FT3 driver. But he talked about the Callaway driver. He picked up some yardage, and that's what you wanted. Is you wanted endorsement, but you wanted it to be genuine. In my opinion, you wanted it to come from real life events.
So I want to jump in here and say something.
Yep.
You said something about, I said I didn't want to be paid. You know where I wanted to be paid? Something that John Rahm and some of those guys should have thought about. I wanted legacy. I didn't want cash in the bank. I wanted to play the irons, the equipment that I knew I could play the best with. And that's what I was seeking out. I wasn't looking for, a certain amount of money in the bank. I was looking for my name on a trophy.
And then you beat Tiger when nobody wanted to challenge him, or everybody. I wouldn't say they wanted to challenge him. They just kind of they seemed at that time, if I remember correctly, they seemed a bit too respectful or scared of him. And at the end of the day, you want to beat the best. You want to be paired against the best. And so that's your legacy. I mean, Be the Right Club today was born out of that 98 model shop by saying, hey, I just need the best set of irons, Ronnie, that you can make me. And I can see McGraw now going, well, we'll make them. You're going to have them.
Yeah, and I did. I would have put my clubs up against anybody's.
But when you look at those companies and kind of look at them, there was Gene Sheely, who was in the model shop behind Mr. Hogan. There was Bob Mandrella, I think, who was in the Wilson model shop behind the Wilson Sporting Goods making products. Jack Wilcotty and Don, I can't remember Don's last name at McGregor, that did a lot of the tooling for the tour players. I've always said this, there's engineers, there's designers, and there's craftsmen. And back then, you got to have engineers because there's so many multi-materials now, and there's a lot of stuff going on that's where engineering has taken us. But back then there was designers who made it look good, but back then there were craftsmen. And we were all making a club to get the ball to not spin for good players. I mean, we all played blades. The ball quit spinning with solid core ball. It started with Precept, and it started with Strata, then came along the Pro V1X on down the line. But the solid core ball changed a lot. But I don't think they got moved aside. Ping was kind of the one that came in and hit the home run in '82 with the Ping I-2. I mean, people don't realize he had Carson 1, he had Carson 2, he had Carson 3, then he had the Ping I, then he had the Ping I-2. And that kind of hit. Then Daiwa got in the game, a Japanese company. along with Mizuno. And all of a sudden, the materials were much better. The graphites were getting there. And that's when kind of distance juke lofts were starting to happen a little bit, because that's that market a little bit. The lofts are a little stronger. The clubs are a little lighter. So, that's when I talk about distance. Then all of a sudden, the marketing game again. Then the other thing, too, is these companies went from being privately held. KKR bought Spalding Sports. And they had a game plan that didn't work out, and they started selling off all the brands. And then, Callaway went public. And when you go public, you better show growth. You can't sit back and that's what I've always respected about the Ping family, the Ping employees, is their product life cycles were always a little longer. They ran to their own tune. They just didn't push something out for the sake of push out, but they were privately held with other industries, So I think it was just a evolution of what our business became. It went from a cottage industry to becoming more of a public entity.
So, Nick, I got to ask you a question. I know everybody out there's, and you may want to call foul. Who was the easiest to work with in contract, and who was the most difficult? And if you say I was the most difficult, I know you're lying.
No. At Hogan, I never had a hard time. I think the toughest deal at Hogan out of 15 guys was possibly Jim's first deal with Andrew Whitley. And Andrew's a dear friend, so I can say this. But we had a rough time, but I think the reason why is I really respected where everybody was compensated. And I didn't like somebody coming in and just demanding money above where maybe our bell cow was. And I kind of respected that ladder, whether it was right or wrong. And John Hart, the GM of Cleveland Indians, taught me a lot about that, because he taught me when I met him, and I told him I'd inherited Callaway and I'd inherited Phil's first deal. And quite honestly, I said, I don't know that the company's going to afford the next deal, but I said, he goes, listen, that's the Boston Red Sox, New York Yankees. This is how we did it. So I learned that. When I got to Callaway, it was not a harder deal, Hal, to deal with anybody, because players used to let their managers manage it. But what I did find is Mr. Callaway wasn't afraid to pay people. And when I came along, we got a new CEO the same week. I'll never forget this. I was Tuesday at the ball straw. This is the year Phil won his first major. I'm Tuesday at the ball straw. That was George Fellows' first week. I remember him calling me, and it's Tuesday at a major. He goes, where you at? I said, well, I'm at Ball Straw. I'm at the PGA. I thought, this is great. He goes, I need you to get back in here. We got to review this budget, because you don't hire a new coach if they're winning. You always hire a new coach when they're losing or they're retired. Well, we were doing about $1 billion in revenue and losing about 10 or 20 million at the time. So that's the reason why George was brought in to fix it. He said, you need to come in. I said, well, I'm on flights Thursday morning. I'll be back Thursday morning. He said, no, I'm going to have a meeting with you in the morning. I said, okay, I'll be there in the morning. So I'm leaving a major, which was kind of unseen. But I got back and he said, listen, we got to get this P&L in line. And so I had to cut 35 players that year. And so when I did that, I had Mr. Palmer, I had Mr. Player, I had Charles Howell's contract out of college, I had inherited Phil's contract. So I wasn't starting the kitchen from scratch like at Hogan. So what was hard for me, Hal, wasn't dealing with Player, because I'll give you another example. Everybody talks about Patrick Reed. I never had any problems with Patrick Reed. He didn't like his Nike deal. He wanted out. I told his company we're not going to talk to him, or his agents, we're not going to talk to him until he releases his deal from Nike. He got out of it on a Monday at Byron Nelson. By Friday night, we had a deal. And I asked the agent, do you want it Byron Nelson through the remainder of the year, or do you want it through the remainder of the year and the next year? The agent says, security. We want it through this year, through the next year. Well, Patrick won the last tournament, I think it's Sedgefield or at Charlotte or somewhere in the north. He won that tournament, and he wanted to renew his deal. They just called and said, want to renew the deal. And I'm getting kind of long-winded way of getting to your answer, Al. I said, we got a deal. Yep, they said, well, here, Patrick, and you got to understand the agent's in a difficult situation sometimes with the player. He goes, well, he wants to redo. I said, well, I'm going to visit with Patrick. I'll sit down and visit with Patrick. And so they said, Patrick will visit with you. We're at the Bob Hope. And I remember giving Patrick this lecture with Justine. I said, listen, Patrick, I did this deal. Go out and write your new deal. Write it. You go play. If you play good, this deal will take care of itself. And that was my big mantra. If you play well, we're not going to want to cut you. We want to keep the deal going. That was the year, Hal, he shot 63, 63, 63 the first 3 rounds and won it. And I thought, oh my God, he's going to call me and want a new deal. And I said, so I just picked up the phone, called him. So I never really had a hard player in contract negotiations. I had a hard time with some players who felt like they wanted something others didn't have, or they felt like they deserved it because they were at a certain level in their game. And I didn't feel like it was right to give a guy who is 100 to 125th on the money list a disadvantage to somebody who's in the top 10 every year. I wanted them to have their products at the same time when they're introduced. Now, behind the scenes, there's input. You know, we'll get input and we'll tone it, and we might need to make a one-off for a higher level player because their game fits that. But I never found a player hard to deal with other than if some players got involved into the contract negotiations. And there was only a couple, and the agents would go, hey, I can't sell this. I said, let me talk to him. Because I knew the agent didn't need to be the bad cop. I said, let me be the bad cop. Let me talk to the player. I'll help you. And when I left, Hal, that's something Mac Barnhart said to me when I left the Tour T. I was shocked at Mac's reaction because Mac was with Justin. He said, you know, Nick, he said, this is going to make it worse out here, you being gone. And I said, how, Mac? I said, no, this is about the money out here. It's about it. Well, that's what he goes, no, he said, you understood the players' situation, you understood the agent's situation, and you understood the company situation. You always tried to put the 3 together. And I said, yeah, we're all in this together. We want our asset. The asset is the player. If they play well and they're doing well, we're all going to do good.
You and I have been friends for a long time. We had to negotiate with each other and everything else. So you're a good man, Nick.
Well, Nick, we want to thank you for being on with us tonight. We could probably go for like 3 or 4 more hours, but I'm glad you shared so much insight, not only about, the company perspective, but also from the player perspective and all the great information. As Hal said, this is what people want to know, the insides of the game sometimes.
Well, you guys, thank you for having me, and it's always a pleasure, and it was my honor for you guys to have me. And Hal, as always great to see you and visit golf.
Well, I love you, Nick. We've been friends forever. So
back at you.
All right. Well, thank you, Nick. And Hal, I want to remind everybody go out to makefieldgolf.com. Check out all the great putters out at makefieldgolf.com. Get yourself fitted. And Hal, I'll catch up with you in several weeks.
Yep.
And we'll do it all over again. All right. Thanks a lot. You've been listening to the Be the Right Club Today podcast presented by Makefield Putters.
Thank you for listening to Be the Right Club Today with your host, Hal Sutton and Mark Greenhalgh. Presented by Makefield Putters.
The preceding episode was a production of Moonlight Media Works in association with Walk Marketing.